Appeals Court is moving quickly to resolve the controversy over President Donald Trump's executive order on immigration. A three-judge panel will hear arguments on the travel ban's suspension in the coming day.
Yeah, Mr. Trump's executive order is currently on hold nationwide. The president blasted the federal judge who made that decision, tweeting over the weekend that the so-called judge's ruling was, and I'm quoting here, ridiculous. The executive order bars temporarily people from 7 mostly Muslim countries from entering the United States.
Well, for more on this, joining me now, civil rights attorney Brian Claypool and CNN's senior political analyst Ron Brownstein. So, Brian, first to you. The argument before the appeals court on Tuesday is solely to do with the stay that was issued on Friday. Can you read anything into this decision by this appellate court to have this 30 minutes of oral argument from both sides?
Well, John, I think what that means is the three-panel set of judges wants more information. They don't have enough information yet to make a decision. For example, from Trump's camp, they're going to want to have more evidence that there is some kind of irreparable harm that the United States would suffer unless this travel ban is lifted. For example, we've got to have some evidence that immigrants coming from these 7 countries pose an actual risk of harm to the United States. And up until now, Judge Robart, he was the U.S. District Court judge, he looked one of the U.S. Department of Justice lawyers in the face and said, where's their evidence that these folks are causing a serious risk of harm in the U.S.? And she couldn't answer that question. So I think it's important that the U.S. government gives the judges this information. So I think it is of value.
Okay, so Ron, day 17, the Trump administration is now in a full-blown constitutional legal battle over one of the signature promises made by Donald Trump during the campaign. What's the political fallout here?
Well, I think the first thing people have to understand looking at this is that this is Democratic states, excuse me, and Democratic attorneys general using against Donald Trump a weapon that was essentially created by Republican attorneys general against President Obama. You know, in the 1990s under Bill Clinton, we did not see Republican states suing against his initiatives. We did not see Democratic states systematically suing against George W. Bush. But beginning under Obama, we saw a pattern where Republican-controlled states would go into federal court on pretty much every major domestic initiative, the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act, the Clean Power Plan, and most directly, President Obama's effort to extend legal protection to adults who are here illegally, not just the dreamers. And what we saw was exactly this. They would have a decision in district court that would be in their favor. It would go up through an appellate court that was favorable to their side, and then reach, I think, a divided Supreme Court. You could see exactly the same pattern here. And I think what this tells you is that however this case resolves, it is basically a measure of the depth of resistance that President Trump is going to face from Blue America, not only in Congress, but in the states. This is the first act in what I think will be many.
Okay, well, Brian, the government is arguing that the president does, in fact, have the authority under the Constitution when it comes to national security and issues of immigration. The states, many others are saying he has overstepped that authority. He has violated the Constitution. And as Ron said, this could ultimately end up in the Supreme Court.
Well, John, I think President Trump's heart is in the right place, but I think his head is in the wrong place. And I think he's gotten some bad advice on this. And what I mean by that is I think he truly does want to ensure that the United States is more safe and secure from terroristic acts. That's for sure. But I think the way he's going about it, as a civil rights lawyer, I've looked closely at this. The U.S. government is coming in and saying, hey, we've got a threat of safety to this country if we let in people from 7 different countries. But what the state attorney general in Washington said, and 16 other attorney generals have now said, John, is, wait a minute, there's no evidence presented that these individuals pose a risk to our country, number one, and number two, under the First Amendment Establishment Clause, this is a law that unduly favors one religion over another, and number three, under the 14th Amendment, what's called the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment, that this is clearly discrimination against Muslims, against a specific religion. And I will tell you that I'm going to make a prediction right now. I think this 3-judge panel is going to uphold this suspension of implementing this executive order until there is a full hearing on the constitutionality of this executive order. Why, John? Because 2 of these judges were appointed by Democratic presidents. One by Obama, and one by President Carter, one by George W. Bush. So there's 2 Democrats and 1 Republican on this 3-judge panel. And I think they're going to rule in favor of suspending application of this executive order.
And from there, it could be appealed. It goes to a divided Supreme Court. If it's a 4-4 split, they will uphold that decision. I mean, all of this, of course, is hypothetical at this point. Ron, we also saw over the weekend Donald Trump lashing out at the judge who issued the original stay on Friday. This is not the first time that Donald Trump has lashed out at a member of the judiciary.
Right, did it with Judge Curiel during the campaign, who was the judge of Mexican descent who was hearing the case against Trump University. It's also not the first time he's lashed out against anyone or any institution that has criticized him. And, you know, we see it with the media, we see it with Representative John Lewis, we see it when he accused John McCain and Lindsey Graham of aspiring to create World War III. And this is part of what, one of the reasons Republicans are still uneasy about this presidency, because on any given day, the willingness of the president to kind of blow past the boundaries of what had previously been considered the acceptable norms of political debate is tested. And they simply do not know what is going to come every day, except they pretty much know that every day there will be something they didn't expect.
Yeah. Brian, this is not the first time that Donald Trump has talked about a Muslim ban. He talked about a lot during the campaign. Could those words be used against him in this court case?
Well, I don't think so, John. And I think what's important to note, too, here is the irony in all of this is that this 3-judge panel, this ruling on this temporary restraining order, whether this should be upheld, they might actually step into the shoes of the United States Supreme Court. Because if this goes all the way to the Supreme Court, it's going to likely be 4-4. And what happens is that reverts back to the ruling of the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. So why is that important? Because President Trump needs to be a little bit more well-behaved. This isn't a boardroom where you could just fire people and yell at people and disparage people. The problem he faces, John, is in politics, unlike the business room, you've got to deal with politicians again. You've got to deal with judges again. And I think that's where he's got to be more careful here. And I don't think any comments he's made is going to affect this. What this is going to boil down to is there any evidence presented to this 3-panel judge that refugees and immigrants coming from 7 Muslim countries pose a serious safety risk to this country? And up until now, the federal district court judge hasn't seen it. And unless there's a new brief submitted that has more evidence, this 3-judge panel is not going to see it either.
Okay, Brian, thank you, Brian Claypool, and also Ron Brownstein. Thanks for being with us.